The black dress was still damp from the rain when I sat down at my parents' dining table, my sister on one side and my mother on the other. My husband, Julian, had been buried less than 3 hours ago. I could still smell the lilies from the graveside. My sister, Chloe, adjusted her sweater, crossed her arms, and said, "So, since Julian's gone, we need to talk about his estate. You can't handle 3 luxury apartments alone, Clara. Mom, and I think it's best if we take over the management." She spoke like a predator marking easy prey, assuming I was broken, naive, and completely helpless without my wealthy husband. I looked at them both, pulled a dark velvet folder from my bag, and laid it gently on the polished wood. "Julian did leave me 3 apartments," I said, my voice eerily calm. "But he didn't leave them for the reason you think, and what's inside his safe isn't money. It's about you." My name is Clara. I'm 32 years old, and until 3 days ago, I believed my life was built on a foundation of quiet, unshakable love. My husband, Julian, was only 36 when a sudden, aggressive illness took him from me in less than 2 months. He was my rock, my protector, and a brilliant man who had built a successful real estate portfolio from scratch. Standing by his graveside in the freezing rain, holding a single black umbrella, I felt completely hollowed out. But the moment the soil covered his casket, the atmosphere shifted. My mother, Eleanor, and my elder sister, Chloe, didn't offer a shoulder to lean on or a word of comfort as we walked back to the car. Instead, they exchanged subtle, knowing glances over my head. They had always viewed me as the quiet, passive younger sister, the sweet girl who was too soft for the real world. They assumed my grief had rendered me weak, helpless, and easily manipulated. They couldn't wait to get back to my house, sitting like vultures at my dining table, ready to tear apart what Julian had spent his entire life building before his memory was even cold. Julian and I had been married for 6 years, and throughout our time together, he kept his real estate investments completely separate from our day-to-day household accounts. It wasn't out of secrecy but protection. He was a sharp investor who managed prime downtown properties, and he always handled the legal complexities himself, so I would never have to stress about business liabilities. My mother and Chloe, however, viewed his financial privacy as a personal insult to me. For years, they had constantly buzzed in my ear, calling me naive and foolish for not demanding my name be put on every property title or forcing him into a joint corporate entity. Chloe used to sneer across the dinner table, telling me I was acting like a glorified housekeeper while Julian built an empire. They mistook my trust in my husband for utter weakness. They assumed I was completely clueless about our finances, completely oblivious to legal deeds, and entirely dependent on Julian's guidance. They spent years convincing themselves I was a pushover, and that assumption was about to become the single biggest mistake of their lives. By 4 p.m., we were sitting around my dining room table. The air was thick with the scent of damp wool and sympathy flowers, but the mood in the room was anything but sorrowful. Chloe didn't even wait for the kettle to boil. She leaned across the table, her hands folded with practiced concern, and laid out her trap. She told me how hard managing commercial real estate was, how grief-stricken I was, and how I shouldn't burden myself with Julian's assets. She pulled out a sleek pen and pushed a document toward me, a power of attorney form that would grant her and my mother total administrative authority over Julian's 3 downtown luxury apartments. They sat back, watching me with eager, expectant eyes, entirely convinced I would sign whatever was put in front of me just to make the pain go away. They didn't know that 2 nights before Julian passed, while he was resting quietly at home, he had handed me a small silver key and told me where to find his personal safe. Inside wasn't just cash or property deeds. It was a thick leather-bound ledger, and every single page contained a story my family never wanted me to read. I slowly reached into my bag, pulled out the thick dark velvet folder Julian had helped me assemble, and laid it gently on the polished mahogany between us. Chloe's eyes flicked down to it, a subtle shadow of confusion passing across her face. "Julian did leave me 3 apartments," I said, my voice eerily calm, without a single tremor. "But he didn't leave them for the reason you think. And what's documented inside this folder isn't just property values. It's about you." I opened the ledger to the first tab. Apartment 4B on Grand Avenue wasn't generating rental income because Chloe's ex-fiancé had been living there completely rent-free for 14 months, using a bogus lease agreement stamped with a forged company seal. Apartment 8C was registered under a fake shell entity, quietly absorbing thousands of dollars in maintenance fees each month, an entity directly linked to a bank account held by my mother. For nearly 3 years, while I was busy supporting my husband and caring for him during his final months, my mother and sister had been systematically leeching off his hardworking success, executing a quiet financial drain behind my back, praying I would never open a single file. I slid the next set of papers across the polished table, letting the crisp white pages land right next to Chloe's unused pen. Tucked inside was a letter written in Julian's clear, sharp handwriting, dated exactly 4 months before he died. Julian hadn't been blind. He was a brilliant investor, and he had noticed the financial discrepancies long before his diagnosis. When he quietly investigated, he uncovered every single fraudulent lease, every forged signature, and every secret transaction my mother and sister had executed behind our backs. But instead of exploding in anger while his health was declining, Julian played the long game. He spent his final months meticulously documenting every transaction, collecting bank records, and securing notary affidavits. He didn't just leave me 3 luxury apartments. He restructured the property titles under a private trust that triggered automatically upon his passing. Every deed was now completely locked under my sole authority, backed by an ironclad legal framework designed to do one specific thing: initiate immediate, non-negotiable evictions and asset recovery lawsuits against anyone illegally occupying or exploiting his properties. Julian didn't just leave me an inheritance. He left me a fully loaded shield and sword. The room went dead silent. The color drained from my mother's face, while Chloe's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. The predatory confidence they had walked in with completely evaporated, replaced by raw, unadulterated panic. Chloe reached for the folder, but I slammed my hand down on it, staring her dead in the eye. "You thought I was weak," I said, my voice steady and cold as ice. "You thought you could march into my home, capitalize on my grief, and trick me into handing over control of the very assets you've been stealing from for years." I pulled out 2 legal envelopes, pre-stamped and signed by Julian's lead estate attorney. Apartment 4B receives a formal 24-hour eviction notice tomorrow morning. As for the shell entity running through Apartment 8C, my legal team is filing a civil fraud report with the state authority at 9 a.m. My mother began to sob, muttering about family loyalty, while Chloe begged me to listen. But their leverage was entirely gone. I offered them one final choice: sign the complete liability waivers and vacate the properties quietly within 48 hours, or face immediate civil lawsuits for corporate fraud and systemic financial deception. 6 months have passed since that rainy afternoon at the dining table. Chloe and my mother chose to sign the liability waivers, vacating the apartments in complete silence before any formal public lawsuits could destroy their reputations. I ended up selling 2 of the properties to fully clear Julian's remaining estate debts and moved into the third, a quiet, light-filled condo overlooking the city. Cutting ties with my toxic family wasn't easy, but it brought a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. Every morning, as I drink my coffee and look out over the skyline, I feel Julian's presence not as a lingering memory of grief, but as a quiet reminder of strength. He knew who I really was, even when I doubted myself. I am no longer the quiet, passive girl they thought they could manipulate. I am whole, independent, and finally living my life on my own terms.